and his dream comes true about him dying. So here's my excerpt from my chapter. He is content dying here in the warm place that they settled in. And what happens is Adon, gives the class to him, and he suddenly becomes Tyron suddenly becomes wiser with this class in the other chapters. And then in the same chapter, in chapter 9, they find out that, how do you say his name? Fluder says that Doyley's missing, so he's MIA somewhere, and then, so...
These names. We're sorry for mispronunciations.
Yeah, serious. And then, so he's MIA, and they continue on with the trip. So in chapter 10, pages 93 to 94, they find a cottage in the marsh, and they just kind of start looking in it, and, they see that nobody's home, and they kind of just want to go in and peer it out. And what led them to the marsh was that iron clasp that Adon gave him, so it came in handy. He became wiser. He just kind of knew what was going to happen through the feelings of the clasp. And then in chapter 11, it was basically with the three witches. They talked to them about turning them into all toads, and how it would be better that they lived their life as toads and they wouldn't worry about the huntsman and all of that. But once Tyron said that they knew who, what's his name? Dalbin was, the witches were like, oh, we raised him, and, this is great that he has a beard, and they were kind of surprised on where he got that from, and they kind of just gave them like, oh, yeah, we raised him, and this is what happened. He took the Book of Three, which is the first book that we didn't read, so it makes no sense. And then they also talked about how they wanted to turn them into frogs, so the witches argued about that for a while. They had their own little conversation that Tyron couldn't follow. And then in chapter 12, on pages 102 to 109, they found out that the enchantresses had the Black Cauldron, but they didn't know where it was, and they weren't just going to give it up. And they, the witches, they started to tell them that they gave, what's his face? Arwen the cauldron to borrow, because they believe in chances for everybody, not just for the good. So they had like a little contract, so when he was done using it, he'd give it back. But he broke his promise, and so since he broke his promise, he had to steal it back, or the witches had to steal it back and hide it from him. And so, yeah, those were my chapters.
Okay, I had chapters 13 through 16, I believe. Yep. And 13 starts out when the enchantresses kick them out of their cottage. Taryn just wasn't having it, so he began pounding on their door. And then it says, they must listen to us, he declared. It didn't even take time to think it over. The enchantresses wouldn't open the door, and Fluter was just like, that's the only answer you're going to get, and maybe it's for the best. But Taryn refuses to let it go. He doesn't trust the enchantresses. But the bard suggests they just go home and let Dalbin and, is it Gwydion or Gideon?
I think it's Gwydion.
Gwydion figure it out. And then Taryn and Elenwy disagree. They don't want to go home. they don't know what Aron will do next, and Taryn just wants to take the cauldron. They decide to stay the night to plan on how they're going to find it and take it. It's really cold that night, so Gurgi goes to find straw for warmth. They begin to start devising their plan and how they're going to find and take the cauldron. They can't think of anything that will work, so they suggest that Taryn takes a nap, try to dream of the cauldron. Maybe that will give an answer. But before he can sleep, Gurgi comes back and he's like really scared. Gurgi beckoned them toward the chicken roost, and the companions hurried after him. The agitated Gurgi led them into the Waddle and Daub building, then slunk back terrified. He pointed to the far corner. There, in the midst of the straw, stood a cauldron. And because of Taryn's previous dreams, he knew this was the cauldron. And Fluter was just like, let's take it right here, right now. But Taryn was like, no, they'll know that we found it, they'll know that we take it, and they'll turn us into frogs. And so they couldn't take it in the daylight, and they must come back at night with horses so the horses can help them carry it because it's too heavy. And then at nightfall, Taryn, he sees a candle in the window of the cottage, so he carefully and quietly goes to the cottage window and he sees something. We'll get to it. He ran back to the others and he was like, guys, you have to come see this. I saw them there, he whispered, rousing the bard and Gurgi. They aren't the same ones at all. And they were all shocked and had to see it for themselves because they didn't know what he was talking about. And they were actually quite beautiful. I've heard of hags trying to disguise themselves as beautiful maidens, murmured the bard, but I've never heard of beautiful maidens wanting to disguise themselves as hags. And Taryn confessed that he was very fearful that they had more powers than they thought. So they delayed the theft of the cauldron until the enchantresses had fallen asleep. Once they heard snores, they tried to go take the cauldron, but it didn't move. And when they tried to remove their hands from the cauldron, they were stuck. And then a figure in a long night robe appeared at the doorway. It's Ordu, cried the bard, will be toads for sure. And then chapter 14 starts out when all three enchantresses go into the chicken roost, where they all are, and they're no longer beautiful maidens, they're back to their ugly selves or whatever. Ordu raised the candle and looked at them, and then the witches, enchantresses, began pestering all of them. And then Taryn realized that this was their plan all along, to catch them. And he begins to freak out. He's calling them names, yelling at them, just telling them to kill him. And because he will fight as long as he lives. And they explain that, the enchantresses explain they're not evil or good. And they asked the companions to bring the cauldron outside. And so now they can move it. And then once outside, it turns blood red and they're able to release it. Yes, now as I was saying, Ordu continued, we've talked it over and we agree. Even Orgok agrees that you shall have the cauldron if you truly want it. The enchantress explained that the cauldron is nothing to them. It bothers them. It's like bothersome for them now. And they further explain that they aren't going to give them the cauldron. They're giving them the opportunity to buy it in exchange for the north wind. Then they ask for the south wind and a few other things. And then everyone starts saying, we can't get that. And so they begin suggesting things like Taryn's sword. And then Gurgi then offers food. Islandwe offers jewelry, and they keep saying, no, that's not what we want. And they don't offer anything that the enchantresses want, so they basically revoke their offer. And then Taryn stops and is like, okay, I got one thing. He offers them the brooch, which is the gift of, is it Adian? Adian? Yeah. And then Taryn confronts Ordu. You have been toying with us, Ordu, he whispered. You saw that I wore Aiden's clasp from the moment we came here. You knew what it was. And then she reminded him that it doesn't matter, it's still his choice to give it up. And he questions why they didn't just kill him and take the clasp. And then they're like, it has to be given. You have to give it up willingly, you just can't take it. And then she gives him a second chance to keep the brooch, and he's like, no, this is my bargain. I need the cauldron. So he gives her the brooch. Then he asks if they can use the tools that the enchantresses have in their shed to destroy it. They say that's okay, it's part of the plan. And then Taryn took the hammer to the cauldron, but it didn't even dent, it wasn't hurt at all. And then the enchantresses explain that there's no way to destroy. There's only one way to destroy it, and that's if someone willingly goes inside the cauldron. Yep, okay. So they decide oh, where did I go? I skipped a page. Yeah, okay. They try to think of a different way because they don't want to like make someone go in there because they'll die if they go into the cauldron. And they think of burying it, hiding it, but that won't work. And then Gwydion planned to bring the cauldron to Dalbin. So they're like, okay, that's what we have to do. And then Taryn